Hi there, my name's Tom and I'm back talking about F1 Fantasy. This is my team selection video for Silverstone. I have kind of three teams in mind. Normally I only have I'm normally really set on like one team or maybe have two teams in general, but I actually kind of have three teams. I'm a little bit undecided this week. So we're going to look at all three teams that I'm currently considering, go over kind of the pros and cons of, why I'm looking at those teams in the first place, and go from there really. So yeah, if you like the video, please subscribe, because I do these videos every race week. Team selection, final thoughts on the Friday. So this Friday evening UK time, I will be uploading my final thoughts after FP2, so we've got a bit better idea of what's going on. Now, hot topic this week is obviously George Russell. He's on this double streak. As you can see here, he's already on my team. Got a qualifying streak and a race streak, so possible 15 points up for grabs. Now, I do want to say before I get into it, two things. First of all, I've already done a video on George Russell a few days ago, so if you want a really in-depth opinion from me about George Russell going into Silverstone, then check out my last video I uploaded the weekend. If I remember, if I'm a good YouTuber, if I remember at the end of doing this video, I'll put a link in the description if you want to check that out. But the summary of the video is that I do think George Russell is a good option. However, I will say, this is a bit random, but I had a dream a couple of nights ago, and in the dream, there was an F1 race, and Verstappen won the race, Carlos Sainz came second, and George Russell came away with just one fantasy point. Read into that what you will. I mean, you might read into the fact that maybe I think about F1 a little bit too much, but, could if dreams come true, then could be looking at George Russell on a one-pointer, so be warned, okay, I've had a dream. But no, in all seriousness, I do think George Russell is a good option. The Mercedes team are bringing, quite public in the fact that they're bringing plenty of upgrades, quite a big upgrade package from what I understand, to Silverstone. So I do anticipate the Mercedes to be strong. There is this new technical directive which we have to take into account, which is coming into place in Silverstone as far as I'm aware. So that could affect the Mercedes sort of more than other teams, because it is going to impact the porpoising issue, which the Mercedes have been struggling with the most. But I think Silverstone, if you're reading up on what's going on and what the Mercedes teams are saying, what George Russell is saying as well in one of his interviews, he's saying Silverstone is pretty well suited to the Mercedes car, the smooth track and the long high speed corners. So I do think Silverstone overall is going to be good, and we know it's home race for George, it's home race for Lewis, so the Mercedes themselves should be, Lewis basically always wins Silverstone. I think that's a lot less likely this year with the Red Bulls and Ferraris being strong, but I do anticipate the Mercedes still to be strong. And the fact that Lewis is probably going to be really strong around Silverstone this weekend is perhaps to the detriment of George Russell as a fantasy asset, because it means George might be less likely to get those beating the teammate points, but nevertheless he's on that double streak, and I do think that George Russell is a great pick. He's in my team already because I was sort of thinking ahead from Canada into Silverstone, and I do think that George was going to be a good pick as long as he did well in Canada, and he did do well in Canada, so now he's on that double streak. He's also quite an easy move on, because we've got Austria the following weekend, which is a sprint race, and I personally am going to be looking at putting the Mega Driver on Max Verstappen most likely. And George Russell, with his price point, is fairly easy to move up to Max Verstappen. Whereas if I had a team which was like Perez, Sainz, Leclerc in my team, it's a little bit more tricky to get from someone like Carlos Sainz all the way up to Verstappen. So George Russell is a nice little placeholder if you're looking at getting Max Verstappen in your team for Austria as a Mega Driver, which that's what I'm currently doing. That's why he's already in my team. Saves me a substitution this week. So yeah, George Russell is going to be in my team this week, barring any disasters in the practice sessions. So so let's have a look at the first build basically, because I don't want Vettel anymore. What happened in Canada to poor old Vettel, I don't know, but for sure, Charles Leclerc, again, barring any disasters in practice sessions, Charles Leclerc is going to be back in my team because I think he's a great option. And if you remember back to last year, he was so nearly won at Silverstone last year in a car which is, far inferior to the likes of Mercedes, and Hamilton spent most of the race kind of hunting him down after that collision with Max Verstappen. I think it was a 10-second penalty they gave to Lewis. And he was tracking Leclerc down, and just the last couple of laps he managed to overtake Leclerc. So I think Leclerc, just purely based on last year's performance in that inferior car, now Leclerc is coming into Silverstone in arguably the best, or at least sort of roughly the best car on the track. Reliability issues aside, obviously, but I do think Leclerc is just going to be a great option and pretty much a season keeper going forward, and very high big contender for the turbo driver this week as well. I think the turbo driver is pretty much between Leclerc and Perez, I would argue, this week. You could say Sainz because he's on the qualifying streak. You can see him here, the little qualifying blue flame. So you could argue Carlos Sainz, but I think Leclerc is still that number one driver for Ferrari, and I anticipate him to do well this week. There are upgrades, I believe, coming for Ferrari also this weekend, so the Ferraris should be stronger. I just think Leclerc he's got to be back in my team this week. I took him out in Canada because of various reasons, but he's coming back in. Obviously, that means we need to make some room, and we're going to have to do a bit of work to work out what's going on. We've got Carlos. We've got the other Spaniard, not Carlos Sainz. We've got Alonso in the team at the moment, who's also on a race streak, so he's very, very tempting to keep as well. Fantastic qualifying in Canada. Less good in the race. Bit of a theme, like recurring theme going on so far in the season. Constantly promising a lot, Fernando Alonso, and then just failing to deliver that big haul of points over the weekend. Is this his weekend? It could well be. The Alpines are also stated to be having some upgrades coming, I believe. So it could be some more upgrades. He's on the race streak. I think Alonso is potentially a good option. So let's have a look at how else we're going to fit in here. If we want to get Alonso and Russell in the team and Leclerc, this is a bit of an issue. So we're going to have to drop the Red Bulls, unfortunately. And we could end up a team like this. Because we'd have to go down to Ferrari to basically fund Russell and also afford all these people on like streaks and stuff. You notice I personally have 1.2 million in the bank, so I could quite easily upgrade Magnussen. I say upgrade, is it an upgrade? Is it a side grade? Is it a downgrade? It's very hard to know at the moment. Magnussen's not been performing well, has kind of been on a little bit of a downer recently. If it's wet, I will say if it's wet for Silverstone, I haven't actually looked at the forecast. I don't think it is going to be wet with the current weather in the UK at the moment, but if it is wet, the Hazes do perform very well in the wet for some reason. So if it is weather for whatever reason, then maybe Magnussen's a big good shout. But I do think with my current budget, it might be time to bring in Nicholas Latifi. And as much as I'm loath to say it, because it's Latifi, he's had a poor season, but he is finishing races. People ahead of him are DNF, and he's just constantly accumulating. If we have a quick look at his recent scores, let's have a look at Canada. 8 points, 13, 12, 10 for the price he comes in at. That's really good. That's really good. Like amount of points most recently. He had, even at the start of the season, apart from Saudi Arabia, he's just been consistently getting around about that 10-point mark. And for 6.7 million, I do think you can't really argue at that sort of price. And he does enable a team that looks like this. And I do think this team looks very well balanced. And I'm very tempted by this team personally. The only thing I'm worried about with this team is no Max Verstappen. I had that dream. Max Verstappen's going to win the race, and Max Verstappen generally has been winning races recently, and it's just what Verstappen does. He just wins. He just keeps on winning. He's just so good. And this is not me being a Max Verstappen fanboy, because I'm not a fanboy of anyone in particular, to be honest. I just like F1 and blah, blah, blah. But I do think Verstappen he's just kind of on another level, and the Red Bull is looking so strong, and reliability issues kind of been pushed to the side. I know Perez had that gearbox issue in Canada, which completely screwed us all over if we had him as a turbo driver. But I do think the Red Bull's looking pretty reliable. Verstappen's looking fantastic, and this team does not cover Verstappen at all. So if Verstappen has a good race, which he likely will, then I'm a bit worried about this team. But the rest of the team, no Verstappen aside, I do really like the look of this team. It's pretty well balanced. It's got Russell on that streak, and the Ferraris, I know they've had reliability issues, but I do think in general across the season they're not going to DNF consistently. They're going to finish races, famous last words. But yeah, I do like the look of this team. So let's have a look at my next team. So here's my next team. To be honest, I'm not actually a great fan of this team. I'm not convinced by it, but it does kind of fit in. And it's kind of an alright kind of balanced team, I suppose, because it kind of splits Red Bull with Ferrari. You've got the Red Bull constructor, which covers Max Verstappen. You've got Carlos Sainz on that streak. Leclerc, who's just Leclerc, probably put the turbo driver on him. You've got Russell on that double streak. And then, Albon is a fine pick, I think, for similar reasons to Latifi. But I think if you can afford Albon, I'd still prefer him over Latifi. But Albon, gets in here. And then Magnussen is, like I've already touched on Magnussen. I'm not completely happy with having him in the team, and this team does kind of force me to have Magnussen, which is a bit unfortunate. Pretty much any build, I'd say, more or less, apart from the build I'm actually going to move on to, funnily enough, in a minute. If you want Red Bull on your team, you kind of have to have Magnussen on your team, with the exception of the team I'm about to show you in a minute. But this team, you could also, if you didn't want Carlos Sainz and you want a bit more Red Bull coverage, you could switch him out for Perez, and then if you've got the budget, you could leave it like that. If not, then you can switch Albon down to Latifi and have a team that looks kind of like that. This team looks pretty nice. I do quite like the fact it gives a bit more coverage on Red Bull like this. But yeah, you can kind of go either way on that one. I'm not convinced by this team. It will sort of leave me thinking about what happens in the practice sessions as to does this team actually fit what I want to do? So less convinced by this team, but let's have a look at that third team, which is an interesting one. I'm not sure if it's something you would have come up with yourself. I'm not saying I'm a genius and I've come up with this amazing team which no one has come up with, but I think it's a little bit more off the wall, if you like, so let's have a look at that as well. Okay, and here's the third and final team that I'm going to be looking at the moment, and I think it looks pretty good, to be honest. Like, it's got Red Bull as a constructor. There's no individual driver from the Red Bull like Perez, or, you know, Verstappen's just too expensive, to be honest. So Red Bull is in here. Good bit of coverage there. Covers Perez and Verstappen to some extent. Russell's in there because I've already spoken about him on that streak. Easy switch to Verstappen next week. Alonso's on the streak. Leclerc, turbo driver. And then, you know, filling in with that midfield kind of package, you've got Bottas, who's just been performing brilliantly all season, even when the car's not done particularly well. In fact, let's have a quick look at Bottas's recent scores. He's done well. Look at that. Like, Alfa Romeo have been on a kind of a bit of a downwards trajectory, but he's still just bringing in the points. Look at that. 20, 14, 26, 23. Pretty consistently getting 20 points and above. So I can't really see an argument too much about not having Bottas in your team. I know Guan Yu Zhou's picked up a bit recently, and there are reliability issues with the Alfa Romeo, but Bottas across the season so far has just been very, very impressive, and I do think this team is fine with him in it. The interesting pick here, I think, is Lance Stroll. Coming in at 9 million. He's actually almost on a price rise there. So if you want to jump on him now, he's pretty close to going up in price. So keep an eye on his price. Stroll is in an interesting one. Aston Martin's definitely looks stronger. If we throw it over to the spreadsheet quickly, I've talked about Stroll in the past, and I do think he's a good option at his price. You can see him here. I've sort of semi-highlighted the row here in my spreadsheet. He's got the most points. Excuse me, the most points across the whole grid for positions gained. He's not a great qualifier, which you think, oh, that's not good, I don't want him in my team. But actually, because he's not qualifying super well, he's a little bit further back, but he's got good race pace. The Aston Martin's reliable. It's got that Mercedes engine, which is given, you know, the most reliable engine out there on the grid. So the Aston Martins are finishing the races, generally speaking, and Stroll is just picking up those points. Any DNFs ahead of him, similar reasons to Latifi and Albon, why he's good. He's really, like, consistently, look at that, 66 points just by finishing races effectively and having a car which is reliable and decent race pace amongst the midfield teams. So Aston Martin have definitely come on sort of leaps and bounds over the last couple of races since they brought in their upgrades, and I do think Stroll, although Vettel was also picked up and Stroll might not be getting those points for beating his teammate necessarily, I do think that Stroll is potentially a good option. You can see he's averaging around 11 points per race. Let's see how well he's done recently actually. I'll have a quick look in Canada. So Stroll, we got 16 points in Canada. Very reasonable for his price. 8 points in Baku, not the best. And where are we? Another 8 points. So the last 3 races, not done super brilliantly, has he? But across the season, excuse me again, still got a bit of fluiness left in my throat. Across the season, Stroll has still shown, you know, some great scoring potential, and I think this team does cover a lot of bases. He gets those streaks in, gets the Red Bull sort of coverage in there, gets Leclerc in there. I do like the look of this team. And this team and the first team I showed are probably what I'm most leaning towards. But we're going to wait and see what happens in those practice sessions to fine-tune what I'm looking at. And like I say, Friday evening I will be hopefully giving a bit more of a definite idea of what I want from Silverstone. So that kind of sums up what I'm thinking at the moment. Stay tuned on Friday. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Like I say, if you have, then please make sure you've given it a like, because it helps me out, gets me some more views, and subscribe so you don't miss out on for more fantastic insight from Tom on a weekly basis. So thanks very much everyone for watching. I'm interested as always to know what you think, what your teams are looking like, and what your plans are for Austria potentially. You know, are you looking at bringing in Russell to switch into Verstappen? Are you putting Verstappen in your team straight away? You know, arguably you want Verstappen in your team. He's on that qualifying streak, you know, it's something to think about. Verstappen's on that quality streak, +5. Verstappen's looking good. His price has come down already, so he's like that tiny little bit cheaper and affordable. For me personally, I'm looking for a more balanced approach this week, and then bring in Max Verstappen for Austria, where I can maximise him on the sprint race, hopefully. So anyway, yeah, thanks very much everyone for watching. That's the video for now, and I'll catch you Friday evening, UK time. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.